Good morning, I'm Ed Pozzuoli, CEO of Tripp Scott, and with us today we are really honored to have this senior senator, United States Senator Marco Rubio. Marco, welcome.
Hey, I'm glad to be back, Ed.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's a timely time for you to come in and talk. Let's talk about Cuba. The protests going on. For the first time in a very long time, we've seen the Cuban people on the island take to the streets and protest their government. Is this going to lead to something, or what do you think?
Well, I think it's the beginning of something, and what makes it unique, I mean, there's isolated protests, but what makes this one unique is three things. It's not organized by anybody, like there isn't a leader or an organization that's behind it. It's organic. The role the internet played, this actually began in one city. Somebody started broadcasting it on Facebook Live, and it spread to over 50 cities. So I think that makes it very unique. And I think the third is that it's being led, by people that have grown up, younger people, older people, cross-generational, that have lived their whole lives under the revolution. And I think the real key here is these are people that basically no longer believe the regime's lies about the embargo, lies about the United States, lies about, they're exposed to the world via the internet, and they're able to communicate with each other. So that was really the big changing dynamic here, is the ability of people in Cuba not just to access news and information from abroad, but be able to communicate with each other and express themselves.
The administration so far has not taken a strong stance on this. What can they do to push this?
Well, the first thing I hope we'll be able to do is figure out a way to provide access to the internet, because that's what's going to continue to allow the people of Cuba both to communicate with the outside world and also with each other. And one of the things that's changed about this is the video. I mean, the repression's always been there. We've never seen it. We've never been able to see the true nature of this regime at the scale that we do now, because people are filming it on their cell phones and are posting it on the internet when they get access to social media. So we've already talked to them and made suggestions, both about how to invest in VPN technology that allows Cubans to circumvent the filters that the regime puts up, and ultimately how to use, whether it's balloons or other high altitude platforms, to beam a cell signal into Cuba that allows Cubans not to have to go through the state system, which allows them, to control and shut off what you have access to. The second is a diplomatic surge. I mean, this is an administration, the Biden administration has been bragging about how diplomacy's back. We should have been at the OAS already, convening the countries in the hemisphere to condemn and isolate the regime for their actions, and to ask for the Inter-American Human Rights Commission to go into Cuba and investigate and document these cases of abuses. A lot of people think that stuff doesn't matter, but it does. It matters a lot to the regime, because that's what begins to crack the internal loyalty and confidence of the security forces. If you're a mid-level or lower-level security force person in Cuba being asked to go repress, and you realize the regime is being condemned abroad and around the world, it begins to shake your confidence and your loyalty and your willingness to carry out these orders from the regime. These things matter. I hope that that's what this administration will really focus on doing. I think they've been late to respond, frankly.
But it takes just start of one of those mid-level people not to respond or crack down on the protesters, and that sort of spreads. I mean, is that what we're looking at?
Yeah, look, ultimately, when a regime is willing to murder its own people, kill thousands of people to hold on to power, it's never easy. But it has to begin by the people that are working for the regime basically saying, look, I'm not a traitor, but I'm not in for what you're asking us to do here. I mean, this, go too far. Well, you've seen inklings of it, particularly in the artistic community. There are artists in Cuba, singers, things like that, that for a long time have sort of cooperated with the regime, gone to events they put on and so forth, who've kind of said, I'm not doing any more events with the regime until such time as these changes are made and these complaints of the people are being addressed. The distancing, we want to see that now gravitate towards people in the government, and particularly people in the security apparatus.
Do you also think that the desperation has reached such a level after 60 years of socialist domination and the COVID issues we've heard over the years? We've heard ballyhoo about the Cuban healthcare system. Obviously, they're not delivering. The desperation there has reached a breaking point.
Yeah, by the way, the Cubans have the ones that they've turned down vaccines. They've said they don't want anything, they don't need any help from anybody abroad. They've got it all under control. So they themselves, the regime has refused to let any of that in. But it's a misnomer to think, it works the other way around. It's not the poverty that's always been there. It's not the hunger that's always been there. It's not COVID that everyone's going through. What it is the realization that there's nothing they can do about it. If you complain about it, you're a traitor and they come after you. And there isn't any way for you to go out and say, okay, my life is not good right now, but I'm going to work really hard, make a little bit more money, and get out of these circumstances. They don't allow it. You can't own a small business. You can't. Everybody works for the state. Everything you have has to come through their hands. So I think it's the realization that nothing is going to change, that there's no hope for improvement, that the only way to improve your life is to leave the country. And a generation was realizing if nothing changes, there's going to be yet another generation of Cubans trapped in this. I think that's what's kind of led to this point.
So how does this end, you think?
Well, I hope it ends, but you begin to see cracks within that regime. You begin to see internal pressure from that regime that there has to be changes, that we're going to have to do something different. And just the opening of the internet, just allowing the internet into Cuba in its limited way has put a lot of pressure on the regime.
Yeah.
Additional changes will do the same. There is no way that this regime as it functions now can continue. It's got to change. And that process has to begin now, and it has to begin from the inside out. There's got to be people within there that say, look, this has to change. We have to make some changes. And from that, these changes, beget more changes.
Let me switch gears. We talked about COVID a little bit, but the Chinese government is now refusing to participate in the phase 2 investigation by the World Health Organization around the source or the start of COVID. Any thoughts on that?
Well, the first is to understand, like all totalitarian governments, in China, you are not rewarded for reporting bad news. So let me just say that if there's a lot of, the intelligence community has said publicly that the chances that this started as an accident at a lab, there was a lab, the lab was messing around. We know that there's a lab in Wuhan that takes viruses that are not infectious in humans and makes them infectious in humans for purposes of trying out different treatments against it. Does this vaccine work? Does this medicine work? But someone messing around with that could be infected by it, goes out home and begins to spread it to other people. That likelihood that that's what started it is just as high. It's the same as if it was just a naturally occurring. And in fact, in the naturally occurring one, we still have yet to identify. The Chinese have yet to say, here's patient 0, here's the animal that started all this, here's evidence that you can actually find this exact virus in a bat somewhere. That said, so let's say there was a lab accident, the people responsible for it would not go running to tell the Chinese the leaders, because you don't get rewarded for that. You get punished, you disappear, you lose your job, and worse. So I think for China, they don't want to know the answer, and it's a system that doesn't reward it. Second, I think for the Communist Party, it's shameful, it's humiliating. It's like Chernobyl was, no, there's nothing to see here while it kept escalating. I don't think they'll ever cooperate, because frankly, it's possible the Communist Party itself doesn't entirely know what the cause was, and they don't want to know. They want the world to accept the version that this is just a virus, it's present everywhere, could have started anywhere, because they don't want scrutiny of what they do at that lab and how they reacted thereafter. So this is par for the course. They're not going to be transparent, and their lack of transparency in the early days allowed this thing to spread globally and has caused trillions of dollars of economic damage, not to mention the death of a lot of people around the world and in this country.
Right. So where does that leave the relationship between China and the United States?
Well, I think it hurts China's reputation around the world. There's no doubt about it. If you look around the world today, some governments will say it openly, some can't, because they're afraid of what China could do to them economically. But China's Communist Party standing in the world today is as low as it's been since Tiananmen Square. Now, that's a fact. The Chinese, whether they know it or not, it's true. Where it leaves our relationship continues to be one of, adversarial competition. We are geopolitical competitors, economic and technological competitors, and we have some friction points. We have a commitment to Taiwan that we're going to defend them if they come under attack. China wants to force them to become part of the mainland. They want to overtake us on the global stage. They want to become the dominant world power, military, economic, diplomatic, everything. And to do that, they have to displace us. So they seek to replace the United States, and they view it as a zero-sum game. In order for them to get better, we have to get worse. So it leaves us sort of waking up to that reality and having to take care of business here at home to make sure we can meet that challenge.
That's a good lead into the political question. Obviously, you're up for re-election come next, not this November, coming the following November. Why is that so important?
Well, two reasons. I think if you look at my record and what I've done over the last 6 years in particular, I say this, I guess there's no time to be modest, but I don't think there's ever in the history of Florida has a U.S. Senator had a better 4 or 5 year period than I did in terms of getting things done. Talk about the PPP program, which literally saved millions of small businesses and tens of millions of small business jobs across this country. It was my law. That what we did on VA accountability, what we did on childhood cancer research, what we did on foreign policy on Hong Kong, just passed another bill. So that's why a couple of nonpartisan groups that study Congress ranked me the most effective Republican, #1 leadership score in the Senate. among Republicans, number 2 overall in terms of getting things done. My constituent service was ranked, got an award for best in the country. So I just look at that and I say that alone is important for the state, as large as this, as important as this, to be represented by someone who can get things done for the state. And then there's the balance of power in the Senate. I mean, the only thing standing between some of the most radical ideas of Nancy Pelosi's becoming law is the fact that in the Senate, it's 50-50.
Right.
If Democrats had one more Democrat, they would vote to get rid of the filibuster. They would pass every one of these crazy ideas by simple majority vote. Joe Biden would sign it. And today this country would have an additional $4 trillion in debt, the federal government running our elections, a massive expansion of government's role in our society, and God knows what else they would cook up in the next few years. So these are important things, and the balance of power in the Senate is what's keeping it from happening. They just need one more vote to overcome Manchin and Sinema, and Florida can't be that one.
No, I think you're right. Well, Senator, one, I want to thank you for your service and your continued effort on these very important issues to all of us. And so thank you again.
No, thank you for doing this. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.